Thanks everybody for joining us today. It's a great, beautiful fall day here in DC, and I'm excited to talk to you about how you effectively plan, execute, and control SharePoint projects. And this is one of those very interesting topics that I feel and I think should be talked more about, but people don't talk about this. So my name again is Dux Raymond Sy, and the PMP stands for Project Management Professional. So for those of you who I haven't met or who I don't know, welcome. And just to give you a quick background, I've been working in this technology space for a long time, even before it was called SharePoint. And I'm sure some of you who knows the technology understands quite well that this is a great technology, but one of the key challenges in rolling out this technology is in the area of proper planning and project management in general. So what I'm going to do in the next hour is pretty much share my experiences, share best practices on what the essential components are in delivering successful SharePoint projects. So as I step through the presentation next hour, the first point I will expound and talk about is the idea of establishing some kind of success criteria. And this is a step that a lot of people, a lot of organizations fail to do. It's always, okay, let's roll out SharePoint, and people don't stop and think about and ask, why are we doing this? How do we define if this project is a success? Is it a success if SharePoint is installed? Is it a success if people are saving time, or is the company saving money? So that's the whole idea of establishing the success criteria. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about how we collaboratively engineer a solution with pretty much end users. You see, a common question that organizations talk to me about is, especially the IT group, they would say, hey Dux, how do you get users to adopt? We rolled out SharePoint, we've installed the best of the best stuff, all the features, but nobody wants to use it. Well, that's a problem right there, because adoption can never be an afterthought. So we'll talk about how you take adoption in as a primary step and help build a solution so SharePoint will be successful. Then we'll also look at how you develop relevant project plan. This involves a schedule, the budget, the relevant resources. And then lastly, we'll talk about how you run and control SharePoint projects. Now, a quick background of myself. My organization is called Innovative E. I'm based out of here in Washington, D.C., and we also have presence in Atlanta, Georgia. We pride ourselves in helping organizations reap the business benefits and the business value of SharePoint. As Catherine mentioned, I wrote the book SharePoint for Project Management, and I'm working on, some of you have been asking me this, I'm working on an upgrade to it for SharePoint 2010. There's my contact info. Feel free to connect with me, and the best way to get me to respond to you right away is through Twitter. I respond via email, but Twitter's typically my instant mode of communication. Hashtag down there, PM for SP, and I have TweetDeck or Seismic running on my background as well. So with that being said, folks, let's get started here. So this is the agenda for the discussion, and before I jump in to how you plan, execute, and control SharePoint project, I want to look at why some SharePoint project fails. And this is what I see a lot that causes a lot of heartaches and frustrations around failed deployments. Typical implementation scenarios of SharePoint. One typical scenario is maybe an IT organization or the IT department. They got the DVD from Microsoft or CD from MSDN, and they say, wow, SharePoint, this is new. Let's try it out. Let's do a pilot deployment for IT. So IT installed it. They want to play with it, and somehow they got marketing involved. They get sales involved. Then magically, this pilot deployment becomes the production environment, meaning it becomes the real deal. Right? Suddenly it becomes the de facto intranet for the whole organization. Then what happens? 2 weeks later, you have 60,000 sites. Content is all over the place. People can't find anything. Permissions is a mess. Then people hate SharePoint, right? They go, SharePoint sucks. You suck. Because in this type of implementation, there was no planning. Everything was ad hoc, and it wasn't taken seriously. It was like a plaything. Suddenly, now people are using it. That's what I see a lot, and I'm sure some of you are in that situation. The second typical scenario that I see that causes a lot of heartache is a hardcore technologist who knows nothing about SharePoint would take customization or programming approaches where you don't really have to. So I call this the heavily customized implementation by techies lacking SharePoint skills. For example, one of the interesting dynamic I see a lot is when I work with developers or I work with hardcore admins who know about SharePoint, I start talking to them about SharePoint, they feel like I'm offending them, you know? Because in their minds they think, oh, SharePoint, this is an end user thing. We're developers, we Visual Studio it, right? So you resort to coding it all the time. And what's the problem? Well, the problem is a lot of these smart people, they just don't take the time to understand SharePoint. They go to code right away, build custom solutions, custom web parts, deploy it. It's going to work. But what happens in the next service pack update? What happens when you upgrade to 2010? How much more time, effort, and money would you spend in making it work? So these are two typical implementation scenarios that causes a lot of SharePoint failures. If you look at the SharePoint implementation continuum, right, to the far right, I call the wild, wild west chaos, where just out there, people do whatever they want. You got bazillion sites, no structure, no information architecture, taxonomy doesn't exist, governance, what's that? Then the other end of the spectrum, you've got what I call the draconian IT control, where you can't do anything. IT has a tight rein on SharePoint, even to your day-to-day activities, such as uploading files to a document library in SharePoint. You would need to fill out a ticket request for. Well, I see that a lot as well. What you want to get to is that middle ground, and I call that middle ground empowerment. To be more specific, governed empowerment. Governed empowerment doesn't mean you're controlling them fully. It's just like what we have in this country, in the United States to be specific, or any other countries. There's rules, there's law, there's government, but we have freedom. And every organization is different. So what I'm trying to say here is SharePoint is a great technology, but to make it successful and make it effective in your organization, there has to be a proper dialogue and discussion from the business level, the IT level, organization level, to say, how can we make SharePoint work for us? That's what we're looking at. Now, somebody's asking about requirements. I had a session about that. I can't pronounce your name, but there's a webcast that I did, and there's a recording you can pick up. But I'll talk about that more later. So with that being said, those typical implementation scenarios being said, so what are the key steps in planning, executing, and running SharePoint projects? Well, you can't just stick the DVD in, click next, 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 and install, and send a mass email and say, here's SharePoint, go and prosper. Not going to work, right? The key steps are, number one, you got to establish a success criteria. And then you collaboratively engineer your business group. Define your project objectives clearly, and I'll show you a lot of examples around this. We'll develop a relevant project plan, and then only at that point you run the project. So how do we establish the success criteria? What do you mean, Dux, by establishing success? So for example, if you are told, so there's different scenarios here, your boss comes up to you and say, hey Dux, I want you to roll out SharePoint. So one of the first things you have to ask is, why? Why are we doing this? Why is it being implemented? And at this point it gets interesting. Because every time I work with customers, I ask that. I go, why are you doing this, customer? And they give me the run-of-the-mill marketing answer, oh, to improve collaboration and document management. That's a kumbaya excuse. So at that point, I try and talk to the customer and help them realize that SharePoint is a platform, and it's great for your organization because there's a bazillion things you could do with it. And then we start looking at what their business is about, what they're doing now, and things that we can improve. So let me give you an example. So I share this a lot in a lot of my presentations, so some of you might have heard about this. A couple of years ago, there's a law firm that the IT director talked to me and said, hey, Dux, our budget has been cut. So for this fiscal year, we still have to supply and deliver the same set of services, 30% less budget. Now you tell me, how can SharePoint make our lives better or easier? deliver the same set of services. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about when we talk about define project success. That SharePoint project will be successful if we're able to support IT with limited budget to deliver the same set of services to their organization. And at that point, that's as far as the IT director knew. So I started talking to him and I said, okay, you're a law firm, you have a bunch of lawyers, so I suspect one of the things you guys do is you do meetings, right? Of course. So what I'd like for you to do is check all the meeting invites or the meetings in the last couple months and see how many times there's attachments, there's conversations around the meeting, all that good stuff. So they did that. They ran an audit, and they found that of the 100 people sample they did, of their email inbox, it's about 1.5 gig as a size box, because a lot of times when they do meetings, they send a meeting invite, they attach all the documents for the meeting. Imagine you attach 10 files, send the meeting invite to 10 people, send 100 files. Then after the meeting, there's action items. Emails come back and forth like there's no tomorrow. Here's my action, there's her action, but all these attachments come through. You know what I'm talking about. They have all this mess, right? So they did an audit, and they found about 50% of those stuff are either redundant stuff, forwarded stuff, or useless stuff. So here's what I recommended. I said, all right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to change, or not change, improve how people do meetings. Instead of doing attachments for their meeting invites, we're going to use the out-of-the-box capability of SharePoint called Meeting Workspaces, which integrates nicely with Outlook, where instead of putting attachments in your Outlook invite or your email invite, you're going to store it in this thing called a Meeting Workspace. And by the way, Meeting Workspace is out of the box with SharePoint, and specifically Windows SharePoint Services, which comes with Windows. They didn't even have to buy anything else. So we did that whole analysis in Dynamic, spent 3 months rolling that out because we had to train people this new way of doing meetings. So it's just that one slice, one little thing. And then we defined what kind of benefits, what kind of success metrics they'll get. So what happened? 5 months later, they dropped one T1 line because they had 3 T1 lines in that office, that main office, because they said people just send files all the time. They had to have that kind of bandwidth. So they dropped one T1 line. They dropped the requirements for their backups for their emails, right? Because now instead of people storing files in their email, it's centralized in SharePoint. Third, and another great benefit, people can find information easily without digging through their email looking for stuff. So what I'm trying to say here is define what it means to roll out SharePoint. Is it being used through collaboration? What specifically? Is it being used better reporting? Is it being used to improve I don't know, project management? Right? And then what's the priority? Is it time? Is it some kind of cost or some kind of capability? You can't have it all. So you have to ask your boss or customer and say, okay, you want me to roll out SharePoint to improve reporting. What's the priority here? You have to have it in 3 months or 2 weeks. We have to have it only with I can only spend $10. What? Because you can't have it all. You can't have something fast, something good, and something cheap all together. If it's fast and it's good, it can never be cheap. If it's cheap and it's fast, it can never be good, right? So you have to think about all these things. Then who is your stakeholder? Who's your customer? Who's paying for it? So you have to analyze and understand all these things before you start pushing technology out. Now, establish rules of engagement. So after you define your project success criteria, why you're doing SharePoint, right? You have to define the rules now on how we're going to run the project. For example, here are our project phases. During initiation, we're going to figure out the high-level scope. We're going to figure out the high-level team and the high-level budget. What about planning? What do we do during planning? We have to identify, based on the deliverables, identify all the tasks, right? What are we going to do during execution? How often do we update the PM as to when things have happened? How often do we report to the customer if it's ahead or it's behind? How do we do change control? You know how marketing would always tell our developers to change how it looks because they don't like how SharePoint looks, right? So what's the rules of engagement for that? So define all these rules. And you got to define roles and responsibilities, how communication happens, and how often you do project tracking. And I'll kind of share some examples in a while. Now, after you've established your success criteria, you got to collaboratively engineer a solution. Now, I see a lot of questions now around um, experience, critical taxonomy, so I'll talk about that in a while. So after you've established what SharePoint will be or how you use it in your organization, the next step is you got to figure out what specific solution this would look like. For some of you who's not familiar with SharePoint, SharePoint is like water. It could be anything, nothing, and something. I know some people look at SharePoint as a competitor to website products or document management, knowledge management product. I mean, it can be those, but at the core of it, it's a platform. It can be anything, nothing, something, and everything. It depends. Unless you define that clearly up front, it's not going to meet your needs for sure, because it's a great big product. It's like clay. So one of the next steps you have to do after you've defined what it means for you to be successful, the next step is you have to collaboratively engineer this solution. When I say collaboratively, you, the implementer, or you as IT, have to interact with your customer and the business to nail down what solution you want to get out of SharePoint. And the first group of people you have to work with is the executives, right? Executives who most of the time would tell you to roll out SharePoint, I find a lot of times don't realize or don't understand the full power of this platform. So you have to take the time, go back with your customer, with the executive, to raise executive awareness about SharePoint. And that's why I go back to my story where if somebody or a customer level folk per Dux, I want SharePoint, spend time, an hour at the most, and define, okay, this is what SharePoint means for your organization. Because it's not that they don't want to know, it's just that they're misinformed in a lot of cases where they look at SharePoint like another server product or another Office-like application. It's not the case. So I have two links there, folks, if you want to look at those, that talks more about how you educate executives to better allow them to better understand SharePoint as a platform. Now, the next group of people that you have to work with is the business. Now that you have the executives hopefully enlightened on what SharePoint means for their organization, you got to work with the business and make them understand SharePoint is more than just a glorified network share. Stress that this is a platform. So let me give you an example. Here's a specific example on how you do that. In my line of work, when I work with customers when we help them roll out SharePoint, I hold this session called Engineering, where I educate the business and help them engineer a solution with SharePoint. And I typically bring high-level department heads or functional managers to this meeting. So, you know, I talk about SharePoint maybe a slide or two, but I don't go into the technical details. I go straight to the point and talk about their pain points. Okay, so I would pick on HR, for example. I go, okay, HR, do you guys have an onboarding process, right? They go, of course. You know, onboarding, you know, if a manager wants a new hire or a new employee, they contact HR. HR puts a job ad, they interview people, and once it's done, we approve it, we put it in our system, they come to work, whatever. So good, they have a process. And then my next question to HR would be, HR, has it ever occurred that a new employee came in and they just kind of hanged out? They didn't do anything for 2 weeks because IT forgot to create a login for them, or a computer wasn't provisioned for them. HR will go, yeah, that happens. And go, why does that happen? I thought you had a process. Yeah, we have a process, but the execution of the process is not as good. Because how all that process works is via email. You know, a manager would go to the network share, 18 folders deep, get that new employee request form, fill it out, email to HR. HR does their thing. HR emails to IT. And if somebody drops the ball along that lines, then a new employee will be hanging out for 2 weeks. That is a pain point right there, friend. So at that point, what do you do? So at that point, I take the opportunity to educate them on how a platform like SharePoint can support them. So I go back to HR and I would say, hey, HR, what if there's an automated system that can improve that email cycle that you have? Wouldn't that be better? This system will remind people if they need to do something. This system will tell people if a decision has been made. HR would say, yeah, we wanted IT to do it for the longest time, but they just don't have time. I go, no, 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 no. What if you do it? So I fire up on the projector, I fire up out of the box SharePoint. I create a simplistic form, SharePoint. I use what's called a custom list, new employee request form, and I put in automation rules called the workflow. And when I say I as HR, I as a non-technical person can do, I put all the rules. I would put things like, okay, if a new employee request comes in, make sure you contact this person. If this person doesn't respond in 3 days or look at it, contact him or her again. You can define all these rules, and then you can automate a lot of your processes. Now, how would you like that? At that point, man, everybody's face changes, and they go, wow, this is great. I can do it. I can solve a lot of business problems. That's what I'm talking about when you engineer a solution. See, I know you can do a lot of complex things with SharePoint, hook it up with web services, with external databases, data sources, but at the core of it, to get people's adoption and buy-in, it has to meet and solve their day-to-day business needs. At that point, they'll look at SharePoint as more than just a glorified network share. Unfortunately, 80% of North American organizations SharePoint 4, glorified network share. So as you develop and build this solution, I highly, highly urge you, do not call it SharePoint, right? As I've been describing it, SharePoint can do 10,000 gazillion things. And that's why if you ask 10 people what SharePoint is, you get 10,000 answers, and all of them are correct. You call it whatever the solution is, just like that HR, right? It could be an employee onboarding system. It could be your corporate intranet. It could be a content management system, project management system. Just don't call it SharePoint. Come on. I mean, back in the mid-90s, when we first had our intranet, what technology we used? Anybody remember? Anybody remember what technology was used to build intranets in the mid-90s or early 90s? Come on, you can type it. What? HTML, right? Front page, maybe PHP. Not PHP. PHP never existed then. It's Perl, right? Perl CGI. Yeah, file shares. Great. Very good. Now, back then, did we call those things like, okay, hey, can you look up that information in the Perl? Or can you pull up that announcement in the HTML? We never did that. So what I'm trying to say is, don't call it SharePoint. Don't say put it in SharePoint. Put it in your intranet. Look it up in the onboarding system. So it's a platform to build solutions on. Okay? Now, once you've worked with the business, figured out what solutions are needed, you got to keep your priorities in order. Because what's going to happen at this juncture is everybody will have great ideas of what they want SharePoint for, but obviously reality says you can't do it all. You have to think about what business need you should solve first. What's the priority? Who's the priority? What are the common features that could be deployed? You have to go back to your success criteria. What's important here? Is it to deliver something at a specific time frame within a specific budget, or we can only we have to have this functionality, etc. Now, here's an example. Here's a tool that I want to show you on how I do that, on how I help my customers prioritize their needs and what kind of solutions we can leverage utilizing SharePoint. Okay, so I'm going to show an Excel file here. Okay, so Catherine, just wanted to make sure. Do you see the Excel file?
Yeah, we're seeing it now, Dux. And I want to tell people they may want to toggle to full screen view to.
Yeah, let me. Okay, so what I have here is a simple Excel spreadsheet. So if you look at the left section, this is for an organization we helped deploy SharePoint, and these are the different. This is a department name, so operations, HR, finance. And one of the things we do as we do engineering is we talk to them about their pain points. So the operations department, for example, they'll say, yeah, Dux, we have challenges with our SOP creation process. our departmental orders process. Everything's manual, you know. Sally has to fill out this paper and drop it with procurement and whatnot. So they would define and list a lot of their pain points. And as they talk to me about this, I document it. And in the back of my mind, I map it to what feature set in SharePoint is relevant or can support to automate those things. So I list it down. So I got all this stuff. Now, in addition, as I work with the different departments, I have them prioritize as well. I go, okay, operations, for example, you have a pain point around SOP creation, around departmental orders, performance eval. If you were to rank these that we can solve first, what would it be? So they would do that for me as well. So after I spend time with them as a whole organization, I look at all this stuff. And by the way, although I have different departments here, this could be applicable at a smaller or at a macro level within a specific group, because you still find different things that you can address. So after I have all these things documented, I do a scope analysis. So what I do, let me fire up, make this bigger here. So what I do on another spreadsheet, I list the different departments and I list all the features in SharePoint that I know of that will be utilized based on their needs, and I start measuring or analyzing them. Number one is based on priority. This priority is based on what they told me, the business told me. Second is, what's the impact or the effort necessary? So I use 1, 2, 3. And what do those numbers mean? I have a standardization of what those numbers mean. It's not just 1, 2, and 3. 1, it requires 20 hours of person with specific skill set. 2, 3-person weeks, etc. So I rank them, I put the numbers, and I define the impact. And what impact here means is, what's the impact to the business? A 3 is a high impact, meaning it's very useful, very important. And then I also measure how reusable is this. If we deploy list capabilities and alerting capabilities, how reusable are they, right? The higher it is, the more reusable they are, because I have to think about if other groups can leverage it. And then I have a total value, and based on that total value, it will tell me which specific SharePoint feature that's on top of the list. And I do that with every department, okay? Now, once that's done, it's not quite done yet, because I have to do a technology reality check as well. A lot of times, you know, we talk to the business, understand their needs. We fail to assess and understand IT capabilities. So what does that mean to IT if IT needs to implement it? Well, we need, for example, one means one full-time person to be able to deploy, manage this capability or this feature. 2 means something, etc. And I have the numbers at the bottom as well. What's the impact to IT in supporting it? What's the impact to IT in training people, in addressing, you know, help desk ticket requests? And then what's the total impact? Because part of prioritization is, once you prioritize what the needs are, what you're going to do, you have to also do a reality check. Once it's there, can IT take care of it? If not, then maybe we can't do it at this point. This is very, very important, friends, because unless you do this, you don't want to aimlessly stick the DVD, turn on features, and have people figure out what SharePoint is good for. No. You see, at this point, I haven't even touched the technology. So you have to keep your priorities. You have to go back and map and ask your boss, hey boss, you told me to roll out SharePoint in 3 months for $200 all by myself. But this is what it means. I've talked to the business. This is all the needs are. So what is it going to be? By the way, you want a copy of this spreadsheet? Absolutely. I'll have you download it for $200 a pop. No, just kidding. Everybody will get a copy of this, okay? Just don't sell it. Now, so going back. So you got to keep your priorities in order. So this is kind of what I showed you. And you know, the great thing about this spreadsheet is, you do your job, you do the analysis. Listen, are you listening? You make your boss, you make your customer do the decision. You make them decide, okay, this is all the needs. What are we going to deliver? Because oftentimes we don't do this, and we aimlessly stick SharePoint in, and we don't meet everybody's needs, and it's our fault. But if we do this analysis right, you make them decide, okay, I'll do whatever you think is important. Just tell me, right? Now, next, there's a lot of questions about requirements, right? I spent a whole webcast, I think 2 months ago, just talking about gathering requirements for SharePoint projects. There's the link at the bottom, so go and watch that after this presentation if you have time. But what I want to talk about at this juncture is, now that you've prioritized what solution you're going to deliver with SharePoint, you go into the next step of identifying requirements. And when I say identifying requirements, it has to flow that way. You got to identify what the business requirements are, and then from that, map it to some kind of user requirement, and then from that, map it to some kind of system requirement. And why I stress that is because oftentimes, especially in SharePoint projects, we get too caught up on the technology. When I ask people, what's your SharePoint, can you show me your SharePoint project requirements? They give me requirements, all right, but what does it say? Oh, we need 2 web front end, we need single round robin redundancy for database servers. I mean, that's cool, but why, right? Before we start talking about technical requirements, you have to figure out what the business needs are. And that's something we fail to do. So if you look at this webcast, this recorded webcast, I step you through the process on how you do that. So make sure you go and watch that. Now that you've got your requirements developed, next step is define your project objectives. By the way, I'm going through this process. It seems like it's a linear, serial, step-by-step process. It's not. A lot of these are iterative. So you go back and forth. Maybe as you start developing requirements, you go back. There's a new business need that arises. So all these steps are iterative. So what does it mean in defining your project objectives? 2 components to it, friends. Number 1 is you have to clearly define the goal. So let's say you found out, based on your priorities, your top priority is to leverage SharePoint as your corporate intranet, which is fine. But that statement alone does not suffice. You have to make it clear, quantifiable, and really being able to address the following questions. Why are you doing it? What are you doing? Who is it for? When's the deadline? Where will it be implemented? And are there any constraints? So let me talk about an example here. One of the recent projects we did, we're doing a lot of SharePoint 2010 upgrade project, but one of the recent projects is for a university. So here's where they're coming from. They had SharePoint 2007, but I think half or more than half of their population are using Macs or Linux, right? And for those not familiar, in SharePoint MOSS or SharePoint 2007, it's not cross-browser compatible. It works brilliantly in IE, but a lot of the features are not available in Safari, Firefox, all other browsers. So what happened with this university is their IT group, they keep getting all these help desk ticket requests that has to do with users not using IE. So there's a pain point right there. Hence, they realize, you know what, let's upgrade to SharePoint 2010 because SharePoint 2010 is now cross-browser compatible, where experience is the same across different browsers. And if we do that, we will solve this pain point around people having issues because they don't have IE, right? So for that specific project, here is the project goal or project statement. The goal statement is the current SharePoint 2007 intranet will be upgraded to SharePoint 2010 throughout the university in order to increase adoption and reduce IT support requirements. The upgrade shall be completed a month before fall semester begins. All right, gang, think about this. This project goal statement has to answer my 5W questions, okay? Why are we doing it? Or what are we doing? We're upgrading 2007 to 2010. Why are we doing it? To increase adoption and reduce IT support requirements. Right? When are we doing it? Before fall semester begins. Who are we doing it for? The whole university. Where are we doing it? At the university. Are there any constraints? Yes, the constraint is should be completed a month before fall semester begins. So what I'm trying to say here, friends, is just by looking at this is like the cliff notes for your project. How many of you out there, if you can raise your hand, yeah, I know, I don't see you, but raise your hand if you've been in a project where really you don't have a clue what the overall thing is, right? I walked into project, I asked a developer, why are you building this web part? I don't know, I was just told to, right? But it's critical to have this one-pager statement like this to get everybody on board. It's like the cliff notes for the project. You gotta have your project goal example. Paul, I'll tell you offline which university that is, okay? So after you have your goal statement, you've got to identify your relevant deliverables. Sorry, can everybody hear me? I think I'm moving too much here. That's why my voice is coming in and out. Just let me know. I could not move as much. You got to identify relevant deliverables. So apart from the end product, like in this example, it's the upgraded intranet. What are the essential project artifacts and or milestone that needs to be completed? So for example, in order to complete this intranet upgrade, we got to have a governance plan in place. We got to have training conducted, content migration, the actual installation configuration. And once we have those deliverables defined, the next step is we can formally build our project plan. All right? Now, I want to clarify something. Project plan is not a printout of Microsoft Project. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Microsoft Project, but what Microsoft Project provides for us is a schedule, resource plan, maybe budget, but not the whole project plan. All right? A project plan is much more than that. In your project plan, the first thing you got to have is defining the work needed to do in order to complete the project. And this is known as your work breakdown structure. So for example, look at this picture. Let's say the project is the SharePoint 2010 upgrade. Look at how I have listed the actual deliverables. We need a governance plan. We need training. We need content migration. We need installation and configuration of the actual product. So the intent here is you're going to define the how. We've talked about the 5 W's earlier, but at this juncture, I'm going to define the how. How are we going to provide governance? So you're going to start defining the tasks and activities under that box called governance. Somebody has to get training on governance development, on information architecture, whatever. So you define all the tasks below those boxes. So at that point, it's more specific now as to which activities or which tasks that you have to do. Second, after you've defined your task, you have to define your estimates accurately, or I don't like to use the word accurate, but you have to be serious in defining your estimates. Okay. So for example, let me grab a pen here. So let's say you've got 3 tasks here. One is to attend this webcast. Second is to paint this room, and third is to install SharePoint 2010. So for example, attending this webcast, this is a 1-hour webcast. All right, I'm going to put 1 hour right there. Right. So right now, I think we have. Last I checked, I think there was 100 people in the room, maybe more, maybe less. So if we had 100 people attending this webcast, the effort, the work that was spent here is 100 hours. I'm sure everybody's with me on that, right? So we've just spent 100 hours worth of effort to attend this webcast, which is cool. Now, what if we had 200 people in here? Will this webcast be shorter? Will it be knocked down to 30 minutes? No, Dux, that's absurd. We'll just exert more effort. It'll just be 200 hours being spent attending this webcast. So what am I saying here? What I'm trying to say here is, what are you estimating for? Like this task, attend O'Reilly webcast, that's what I call a duration-based task. No matter how many people you throw in it, it's always going to be 1 hour. And how does this relate to the SharePoint project? The problem I find in a lot of SharePoint projects is we're not clear when we ask people how long certain things take. How long does it take for you to do this? Hey, Joe, how long does it take for you to build the governance plan? I don't know, 4 days? What does that person mean by 4 days? Does that mean if there's a lot of people thrown there, it's still 4 days, or will it reduce, etc.? This is like the second example. Painting a room is what I call a work-based task, where let's say a room would take, I don't know, 24 hours to paint by an expert painter, given an 8-hour day, so one person painting it, giving it an 8-hour day, that's 3 days. But if I tell the painter, well, painter, I'm going to have a party in 2 days, can you paint this in a day? Painter will go, yeah, that's fine. I can get 2 other people to help me. I can paint it in a day, but the effort is still 24 hours. Y'all with me? So this is the idea. If you throw more people into some kind of task or work, time spent would reduce, but the amount of effort is still the same. Is that the kind of task you're estimating for? Well, let's go to this third example, which is mostly common in projects like SharePoint. This is what I call resource-based estimates. Now, anybody in this session installed SharePoint 2010 on a single server? Anybody? If you have, tell me how long does it take for you to do it. Just put it in the chat room. Put it in the chat room. Anybody? Nobody? 45 minutes, Gerard. Very good. All right. So if you ask me, Dux, how long does it take for you to install SharePoint 2010 on a single server? I would say 10 minutes, because just like John's answer, there's a lot of scripts out there that can help me do it. In fact, it's in Codeplex. Because I've done it before, I know what I'm doing. And then with Gerard, it's going to take him, I don't know, 45 minutes. With Greg, 4 hours. And that's the kind of task that's resource-based. It depends. So when you ask somebody how long will it take you to install SharePoint 2010 on a single server, if the person says an hour, is that true with another resource? Or are you assuming it's this person that will do it for you? That's part of sound project planning. Now that you have a list of tasks that has to happen, you have to be clear what kind of task or what kind of estimates you're putting against these tasks. Because you want a schedule that's realistic. You have to take estimation seriously. Now, next, once you have your estimates, this is the point where you take your tasks, take your estimates, and identify the dependencies. You identify what has to happen first, what has to happen next, and then based on that, you'll figure out what the schedule of the project is. And this is why I love Microsoft Project. Microsoft Project is powerful and useful scheduling for planning or running a project. I have a webcast around that on that link, and I also did a Microsoft Project webcast a while back, Riley as well, so feel free to look that up. So this is a schedule. This is actually a migration schedule of SharePoint 2007 to 2010 that I did for a customer. And by the way, I'll give this to you as well. This is a Microsoft Project schedule that I have. I'm going to send you the Excel template I show, and I'll send you this to you as well. Okay. So, but here's the deal, friends. Realize up to this point, I haven't started the project. I'm doing my homework, developing the plan, figuring out the schedule, because I want this to be available to my customer, to my boss, and say, okay, boss, based on all the needs, on the priorities, all the tasks necessary, this is what it's going to take to upgrade to SharePoint 2010, for example. You're welcome, Greg. Yeah, next time I see you, I don't mind you buying me dinner. Now, here's the fun part. So I have this schedule, obviously. What we don't have yet is defining who's going to do what, right? And this is a great time now, based on task, based on availability. You got to figure out who's going to do it. Because a lot of times, I see this in organizations, in SharePoint implementation, large organizations, resourcing is not realistic. IT, can you handle this, right? Who's going to do implementation? Do you have the relevant skill sets to plan, engage with the business, and deploy SharePoint? So we're not even talking about the technical piece, right? You have the relevant analysts. You have the relevant processes for release management, disaster recovery, auditing. What about support? What about future releases? I make fun of this picture because I find in a lot of organizations they expect SharePoint implementers, Superman, to do everything. Just can't. And if you're in that situation, I highly, highly urge you, don't even get started. Do your homework, identify the priorities, come up with a schedule, really talk to your boss, to your customer about what it really takes to be successful. Now, staff your SharePoint project realistically. And this is an ideal scenario. I'm not saying you have to have all these people, but these are the relevant skill sets to have successful SharePoint deployments in place. But what I want to stress on, friends, is this top part. You got to have a committed sponsor in a project manager. What I mean by committed sponsor, it's that person who's writing the check, who truly gets it, and it's in it for the long haul. Not for their political reasons, and not for just a one-time thing. Because once you do SharePoint, this is like marriage. It's a long-term commitment. It's great, but you have to lay the foundation well. Second is you have to have a dedicated project manager who will run and own the SharePoint project. In short, you got to have that chokeable neck. Yes, that's a technical term, chokeable neck. Because a lot of times I see SharePoint projects not taken seriously, in fact, considered as a project, where there's always a blame game, you know? If stuff doesn't happen, oh, IT didn't do it. No, the business didn't know what they want. No, this guy in IT forgot to do this. There's no central accountability. So you have to treat your SharePoint projects as true projects, not just side effort people will do after work. Okay. So staff your SharePoint project realistically and responsibly. Once you've staffed it, and I guarantee you at this point, what you initially defined as what you're going to do with SharePoint, if you're taking it seriously, the scope would scale down because you don't have the necessary resources, or the business won't have the necessary resources to help you do all what they first said they want you to do. Next step is you're ready. You're ready to run the project. So once you run the project, one of the key things is you have to define how you're going to track progress. And I love this quote from George Bernard Shaw. He said, "The only man who behaved sensibly was my tailor. He took my measurement and knew every time he saw me, while all the rest went on with their old measurements and expected them to fit." What am I saying here? Don't you love it when you walk into status meetings every week and, yeah, we're 50%, yeah, we're 60%, yeah, we're 99%, and then the next week's meeting, no, we're 10 months behind. There's no measurable tracking mechanism. So in my mind, especially when you run SharePoint projects, you have to make time and specify, okay, every Tuesday, for example, at 3 o'clock, we're going to do a quick status meeting. You're going to give me updates on how much time you've spent and how much more time you need. Schedule, I know, is on top of everybody's list. Are we ahead? Are we behind? What about risk? What are the new risks? Well, last week, Dux, there's this ASP.NET vulnerability just came out. We might have to go back and tweak the design we had for the implementation for security reasons. What about changes? This is big. This is something we don't take seriously. It happens all the time, especially in projects. No matter how much time the business spent with you, talk to you about what they think they needed, and you help them out, all that good stuff. Halfway, they'll call you up and say, hey, I don't like how it looks. Can you make it look like Ferrari.com? Well, you have to have a mechanism to manage that. Right? This is called your change control process. Their reasoning might be valid, but you have to go through a decision-making process for people to say, okay, why is it important to change how it looks? Let's go back to our list of priorities. Well, because we have a new ad campaign, because this will be public-facing. Okay, well, that means we have to hire a really good branding person, and it's going to take this much longer to do it, yay or nay. Involve them in the decision-making process. You do not ever just want your resource to take all these change requests and have them start doing it. And to me, tracking with percentages doesn't mean jack squat. Now, key steps in project tracking. You got to monitor the progress. So you set up your rules of engagement. Every Tuesday, we're going to have a status meeting. You're going to tell me where you are, how much more time you need. You got to analyze it. Looks like we're a couple days behind. What's the impact? Is it okay? Well, if we have a hard date to meet, does that mean we have to add more resources, or do we have to work overtime? We have to correct this schedule because a new change request came in, right? We have to add 10 more tasks, or the project now is extended a week. And then how do we manage changes? So these things right here are iterative, and they're all going in cycle throughout the life of the project. This is a tool I use. Microsoft Project is a great tool to track project progress. So if you look at this slide, and especially this view, this is known as the Gantt chart view. Notice I have two sets of bars, the top and the bottom. The bottom is what's called the baseline. That's what you plan for. That's not going to change. And the top one is your actual. So you can literally look at this and forecast, well, this task is 5 days behind. This is how it's going to impact the project based on our plan. This is where Microsoft Project is really, really helpful. I did a webinar, like I said, on how you do all this. Just go and check out the O'Reilly Webcast page, and I show you how you do all this. So, once you do that, hopefully, once your initial solution is deployed, like I said, SharePoint is a great platform. It's an iterative platform. Once you get the business, the users, to have a taste of the solution it can provide, they're going to come back to you and say, what about this? Let's go back to our priority list and do priority 2. Let's help HR. Let's do priority 3. Let's do a reporting platform, etc. So we've got about 5 minutes left. I know there's so much to talk about, but hopefully this 1-hour presentation was helpful to you in really understanding why it's necessary to properly plan and spend time understanding business needs before throwing a SharePoint technology solutions. I want to open the floor now for questions and answers. So there's my contact info, and if you would be so kind, provide feedback on that feedback link. And like I said, once this video is available, I'll send all the information to Catherine, and when she emails everybody, you have a link to the recorded video, a link where you can download the Excel spreadsheet, and as well the Microsoft project plan for a 2010 upgrade. Okay. So let's see. I'm looking at the question panel here, Catherine. One question is, how do you convert requirements into tasks with respect to SharePoint implementation? I did a whole presentation on this, so if you can look that up on the O'Reilly Webcast. I spent an hour talking about how you develop requirements for SharePoint projects, and I give sample templates as well. William, you want to hear more about taxonomy? Actually, that could be a whole session in itself. In fact, I'll work with Catherine to do a whole session on information architecture and taxonomy in SharePoint. Very important topic and very misunderstood topic as well. But I'll provide links and resources for you to get started. Let's see. Russell, when action items from one meeting roll into the old business discussion next meeting, how do you handle with this meeting workspaces? Just quickly, Russell, you can use the multi-page meeting workspace meeting, so you can relate those information into a single meeting workspace. Venkatana Rishma, whatever features you're showing in Excel sheet, can we get a list? SharePoint 2010 features list, please. It's actually available in Microsoft. So you can go to Microsoft, they have a whole list of what the 2010 features are. Greg, I know how important the PM requirements are, but how do I convince senior management when they have told the business we are using SharePoint for a DMS? What's a DMS? I'm not sure what a DMS is. MS is managing systems. Document management systems. They have told, yeah, I mean, you can use it for a document management system. How do you convince senior management? Well, I suggest a couple of things. I have a link up there, and if you go to my blog, I write a lot about the importance of high-level executives or senior management getting it. So really the key is they have to get SharePoint as a platform. It's not a glorified network share. You know, I heard there's a good book called SharePoint for Project Management. Give them a copy. But yeah, I think it's critical. Education and awareness at the executive level is critical. And one more point there is, how do you convince them? You know, show them stories and case studies of how people have leveraged it differently. And there's a lot of stories out there. Drop me an email, I can shoot you resources. Does having the ability to run parallel with social analytic tools and dashboard capabilities? Absolutely, Punit. You can certainly do that. Really, the question in SharePoint is not can you do it, is how do you do it, Grasshopper. How do you decide what type of workspace to use for project management? Is there a methodology? Russell, it depends on your organization. It depends on your organization's project management maturity or lack of maturity. The background of your people, it depends. I mean, you know, I can throw methodologies out there, but at the end of the day, if your organization's people and process is not there, I highly, highly do not suggest you throw a tool first. Punit, how would I do it? It depends. There's a lot of different ways you could do it. If you want dashboarding capabilities in 2010, there's a chart web part, performance point, you could do it, Excel services, so a lot of different things you could do. Any other questions? Good. Well, hopefully this was worthwhile for everybody and beneficial. Thank you again for spending an hour of your time. Don't be a stranger. Drop me a line, send me a tweet. And talking about executives, Greg, if you click on that event I have online, that's specifically for executives, so to help them understand the business value share. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great afternoon, and see you at the next webcast.
Hey, thank you, Dux. That was, as always, a great webcast. You're one of my favorites of all time, so thank you for doing this. And thank you also, everyone who joined us today. It was a great group, and I think that adds a lot to any webcast. So thank you for taking the time out of your day. I just want to remind you one more time about our discount code. Maybe Marcy could post it in there. It helps make these free webcasts possible, so we really encourage you to use it. Help support us, just like PBS, and that way we can continue doing this. So the code, how long is it valid for? I'm really not sure. I think it's good for a long time. I don't know when it expires, but it's forecast. And let me type that in since Marcy is not doing it. Oh, okay. There you go. Forecast. And it is good for 40% off books and 50% off ebooks from O'Reilly.com. It's not good on Safari, so it's not good for rough cuts, and it's not valid in the UK shopping cart. But O'Reilly.com, I think it's one of the best discounts you can get anywhere. So please help support us. And Dux, thank you so much. Talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.